Okay, we're ready whenever. Lovely. So thank you to those of you who are in the audience right now, and welcome to EGX 2019, the final day. The panel here is Oculus and Epic Games, the morality of software exclusivity. First thing I'm going to do here is introduce you to our four panelists. So first up here, Stephen Pryor, VR Bugstream on Twitter and Twitch. Eden Bethel here from Helix VR. And we have Chris Gray, aka UK Rifter on YouTube. And we have Sam Watts here, who is from Make Real, the developer of games like Radial G and Loco Dojo, which you may have played on VR systems. So the first thing I'm going to quickly do before I shut up and let these guys do the talking is just do a quick explanation on the difference between hardware exclusivity and software exclusivity that we're going to be talking about today. So hardware exclusivity is when we're talking about like Super Mario, Legend of Zelda, God of War, titles that are made by a hardware manufacturer like Sony, Nintendo, or Microsoft for their own platforms and their own systems to help sell their hardware. Software exclusivity is something that's really only started rearing its head in the digital era within the last sort of 10 years, where a game like, for instance, Borderlands 3 can launch on PC but be exclusive to a distribution platform, such as the Epic Games Store, instead of a platform like Steam. So even though you all may be playing on the same hardware on a Windows PC, you're limited to where you can buy and play the game in terms of a software platform. And yeah, so that's generally the difference between hardware exclusivity and software exclusivity. The first thing I want to talk to you guys about is specifically hardware exclusivity. This has been a thing since the beginning of the video game industry. And first of all, just your thoughts on hardware exclusivity, why it's necessary, what are your opinions on exclusivity as a whole? I know that's a loaded question.
That's a very loaded question. I personally believe that having hardware exclusivity is a positive thing. The manufacturers know what their machines are capable of, and so therefore any software that's developed for that hardware platform is designed to run really, really well on it. So when you think about things like the Nintendo Wii back in the day, and you had the classic like Wii Sports, we all know that that ran extremely well with those Wii motion controllers, and it was obviously designed for that platform. So it became like a hardware kind of system seller. So I understand why there's hardware exclusivity, and when it works well, it works really, really well, and it can sell that console, it can sell the software.
I think that Nintendo, here we go. I think that Nintendo is probably a good example of that, where it does work well. So you mentioned the Wii, which is a good example. You've got the Switch as well, the Joy-Cons, so it uses the motion controllers, and that can be designed for them. I'm not so much of a fan of when it's more like, say, the PlayStation Xbox, where there's very sort of minimal differences. But with Nintendo, or with, say, some of the VR hardware as well, it can be more positive in that way.
Maybe on the sort of opposite side of that is, yes, you have hardware and software titles being made by the first party, but then when you look at a third party app or game that's being released across multi-platform, then you have hardware-specific DLC exclusivity. That is purposely holding back content from the other platforms, just because there's a deal with PlayStation that will get that DLC, there's a deal with Microsoft that will get DLC that doesn't exist, etc., etc. And then it's blurring the lines of what is acceptable and what is just marketing.
I mean, yeah, that's an interesting point, particularly from your perspective as a developer. If you look at, for instance, the recent Call of Duty Modern Warfare news, where there is a game mode that for a year is only going to be playable on PlayStation 4 and not anywhere else. And obviously this is different for every situation, but at what point how far is too far? To an extent, it's useful for developers to have that extra cash from those kind of deals to help finish a game, to help fund a game, to help publish a game. But to what extent are you then restricting your player base, restricting how many people can even find and enjoy your content? If you're a development studio, you're going to be making more than one game, hopefully, in your lifetime as a studio. And so surely you want as many eyes on it as you can. How do you sort of balance that ratio of taking these publisher deals, but also trying to get as many players in as possible and keeping them all happy as possible, irrelevant of platform?
So I come into this as a bit of a consumer, obviously, and I sort of understand that exclusivity is one of those things that's a bit of a dirty word.
Yeah.
After talking with developers and understanding the challenges people face, economics and the finances of this is absolutely critical. That's the key point here, because in reality, if you get like a builder in to work on your house, you pay this guy a little deposit up front, you pay him as he does the work. A software developer, unless they're a large studio with a great deal of capital already in the bank, they're not going to have the funds to see that development through to the end. A lot of the, especially in the VR arena, which is where I have the interest, is quite a niche area of development. And so to get those games off the ground, often it's just one guy in his bedroom coding away at night. This guy has to pay the bills, he has to, he has to pay the Netflix bill, he has to pay for the food, put the food on the table. And that development cycle might be years. Yeah. So the reality is that exclusivity in that situation, someone coming along and saying, here's a wedge of cash to push you over the finish line, that's how these things get off the ground. That's the reality. I mean, you have Kickstarters, you have all these ways of getting other funding into your project, but that takes a great deal of effort in hyping up the game and hyping up the software, and then the developer is spending less time developing and more time hyping something that doesn't yet exist. So for me, hardware or software exclusivity is a necessary evil, unfortunately. I think the morality question, the ethics question, is with the larger studios who have the money in the bank, like Epic, and then they're really just taking the cash. Really, that's about just, that's more cynical.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you as well. I think the developers initially, especially ones where it's their first game or experience, they need that cash injection, and exclusivity gives them that window to be able to jump through and get it to market. And then I think if that game is a success and then they have more cash in the bank, then maybe the exclusivity, the exclusivity question comes up again, and they have the power behind them to maybe make a different decision on the next one.
Yeah, I do generally agree as well. I think, say with a small developer and say Oculus does, say they want to give them, say, a cash infusion for, I'll say, a timed exclusivity, I hope anyway. That's very much more, I suppose, moral, because we're talking about the morality, than, say, when we're talking about, say, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is coming only to PlayStation 4. It is great, by the way, go check it out if you're here, if you've not yet. Whereas the other titles have previously come to, say, PlayStation 4 and Xbox, and then later to PC. And they're a big studio. They don't really need the cash as much. They could probably do it by themselves, and then they could come to everyone as well.
And so to explain the Oculus side of the situation, which is sort of somewhere in the middle. There we go. Okay. So the Oculus situation is somewhere in the middle of hardware exclusivity and software exclusivity. People who are playing PC-based VR platforms, whether it be Oculus, HTC Vive, Valve Index, Windows Mixed Reality, they're all running similar hardware in their PC, but to run a game published by Oculus or bought by Oculus through their software, you have to be running Oculus hardware. And so the difficulty there is when people own hardware that can play the game they want to buy and download, but can't play it because it's not that specific brand. There are workarounds, there's a program called Revive, but it still means that people at home are having to put in the work and effort to make these games playable for other people, and there's no official support. So I'm curious what you guys think in terms of, obviously, Oculus for a while was a new company on the block, trying to compete with the likes of Valve, with the Vive. But once they got bought out by Facebook, was it necessary to bring in those exclusives? I mean, there's stuff they publish, that's fine, but stuff like Superhot, which when it launched was an Oculus exclusive for a while, and they tried to buy Serious Sam as well, and they refused. So I'm curious how much you think that was necessary, or to an extent maybe just Facebook exercising their wealth.
I think as a new platform, you have to have a reason to give people to come to your platform. And if we hark back a little bit further, in the days of 3D effects and Power VR, you were limited by a graphics card that you bought with what you could and couldn't play. Skip forward, and yes, now, if you want to play certain titles, you have to go through the Oculus store. But ultimately, I don't want to see a monopoly. I don't want everything to go through Steam. A monopoly is never good for anyone. But ultimately, most hardware manufacturers, they lose money on units, and they make money on selling software titles. So in order for them, an Oculus to get some kind of return, they have to have a store where they can take their 30% cut in order to make the next version and carry on. They've just announced, was it $100 million worth of revenue through all of the Oculus stores. 30 million of that has gone to Oculus, because that was the gross number. So 70 million has gone back to developers, but there's 30 million which is funded or helped recoup the initial costs of all that hardware development.
Yeah, I completely understand where you're going from, and I agree. I mean, on a slightly different note, I'm not entirely convinced that Facebook's end game is to make money from software in the same way that Valve is. I think that, when you look at Facebook as a company and what they're trying to do and where their money really is. I mean, I don't want to be conspiratorial here, but it's really about kind of data, and it's about people, and it's about communication. And virtual reality, I think, provides Facebook with that kind of ability to do things like telepresence, the ability to sell a seat in a show 20,000 times over rather than just once. Facebook understands how valuable this is to their whole social media infrastructure. I strongly believe that obviously they're trying to make a business out of the Oculus store. I mean, it'd be crazy not to, and it has to fund itself. But I think the funding is almost like a break even for their end game, which is probably something a little bit different to how we're seeing it today. I mean, I think the Oculus, that's essentially it. That was my point.
I mean, I think I can't actually remember the total value of the Oculus Indie Dev Grant that they announced back in OC2, OC3. Something like 250 million.
Around that, yeah.
That's obviously not being recouped with $100 million dollars worth of sales. But yeah, Bruce is right to a certain degree. The real money is in the data.
Yeah.
Anything else is pocket change and sort of bunsy, really, for certain.
And they've made no secret of the fact that they're not. I mean, there's a few things in their terms and conditions and things where they seem to suggest they don't want people hacking around with their software, but people have made it very clear. In fact, Jason Rubin has said it many times that he doesn't mind people hacking around with Oculus software. Yeah. We know that if you buy Vive games, you can make them work both ways. There's no problem in sort of modding things to work. It's quite unusual now to find a game that's completely locked to the VR hardware. So I don't think it's quite the same as maybe some of the other, obviously, console product, that kind of level of restrictions. It's not really on the same level.
Yeah, I've actually got the exact quote there from Jason Rubin at Oculus and Facebook. If somebody has purchased content, they want to mod something to work on their PC or do whatever they want to do, nobody at Oculus has ever had a problem with that. Palmer followed that up by saying, if customers buy a game from us, I don't care if they mod it to run on whatever headset they want. As I've said a million times, in brackets, and to counter the current circle jerk, our goal is not to profit by looking for people to buy only our hardware. If it was, why in the world would we be supporting Gear VR and other manufacturers' headsets? The software we create through Oculus Studios, using a mix of internal and external developers, are exclusive to the Oculus platform, not the Rift itself. And that's why programs like Revive that have let you play those exclusive games on other hardware, it's never been shut down by Oculus or anything like that. But it is worth noting they're also not making those tools available themselves. You can't. I mean, there's a reason you can't connect a Vive or an Index or something through the Oculus app in the same way you do a Rift. So, as much as they're not discouraging it, they're also not encouraging it.
Yeah, I firmly believe that if Facebook was really behind VR and they believed in it in in a gaming platform, then they wouldn't have thrown up the wall straight away. I think they do have other intentions with VR. They see it as the next technology, and it's going to be extremely important for social media and data mining, especially things like eye tracking data, which is currently being used for advertising. So people are testing at the moment. Say if you walk down, say, a supermarket aisle, and you've got a VR headset on, you're doing it in a virtual environment, where your eyeballs first go on that shelf to which product is extremely valuable data. And that's the kind of thing I believe that Facebook are interested in. But they have to keep being seen as this kind of pro VR for gaming, because that's how it started with Oculus, and they know that they would cheese off a lot of people if they didn't keep that side of it active. But when you look at what they've done with their hardware, they're kind of showing their true colors, I think. So you've got the Rift S, you've got the Quest. Being a VR gamer and a VR streamer, I'm very bitter about this, but I'm trying to remain level-headed. But when they were developing the Quest and the Rift S, you can see that they literally passed over the development of the Rift S over to Lenovo.
Yes. Yeah.
And they kept the Quest locked down, because that's their baby.
Yeah.
That's what they want to focus on, is the Quest, because that's the one they want everyone to use. That's the one that's being really locked down. I mean, they're barely letting any games on their store. I don't know what percentage of those get rejected for the Quest store, but it's a really high number.
Oh, I mean, Sam here has gone through that process himself and seen how stringent they are with that platform, yeah.
And also talking about the fact that they're locking things down. They pretend that they're open. They're letting Revive carry on. But the recent controversy with Beat Saber on the Quest store.
Yeah.
So you could play modded games and sideload the custom levels into Beat Saber, and Oculus put a stop to that. They've put a stop to it. And other games that are considered amazing titles in other platforms, Oculus have decided, no, it's not for us, because they have a very specific goal and vision. And I think over time that vision will become more and more clearer, and I don't think it's gaming.
It is worth clarifying in terms of Oculus putting a stop to modding on the Oculus Quest version of Beat Saber. They didn't go out of their way to shut anyone down. They just introduced a little sentence in the terms of service that basically says we don't allow software modding, and the developers of Beat On, the software that allow that, respected that and took down their software of their own choice. No one actually contacted them or anything like that. They just didn't want to risk breaking terms of service publicly. There is a piece of software that has come out to replace it, and unsurprisingly, the developer is completely anonymous. So there are currently ways around it, and Oculus isn't doing anything to shut that down, but they did just put that in their terms of service, and that's not an accident.
Yeah, but do you think that that's because they're trying to restrict modding, or because they have like genuine concerns about copyright infringement on their platform? Beat Saber is effectively the mods are effectively a way of importing copyright restricted music into the game. A lot of these guys stream it out onto YouTube, and of course, causes all kinds of problems. Oculus doesn't want to be viewed as like their platform enabling that kind of copyright violation.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's to cover their own backs, especially when you consider that arguably Beat Saber is the most popular VR game for streaming, if not just the most popular VR game right now. Putting aside the idea that they're selling lots of content packs now with known bands. They did the Imagine Dragons pack and stuff like that. And so if they're going to keep working with bands, those performers need to know that people aren't going to be able to just pirate their songs from modded versions anyway. I'm sure all of the songs in those packs, besides original music made for the game, I'm sure was already existed as a mod beforehand, and they want to be able to sell that DLC. And yeah, for record labels, Facebook don't want to be sued by anyone. So even if they're not going to go out and maliciously take their software down, if they can at least then say it is against our terms of service, they can blame it on the mod developer rather than.
It's a strange point, really, because if you look at other music games that have been far more popular on other consoles, like Guitar Hero, Rock Band, etc. Obviously, the nature of the hardware itself wasn't that hackable. But there wasn't a huge community of people creating custom songs for Guitar Hero to download.
Yeah.
But yet, a moderately small title in comparison to those, Beat Saber, yes, they were very open to it initially, but there was a lot of outcry around, we can't create our own custom tracks. But to a certain degree, the way they are being able to, especially on the Quest, is through the Android security vulnerabilities, decompiling the APK and essentially running a pirated cracked version of the game, which the Quest is a console hardware
Absolutely.
device. So, I mean, it's difficult. It's a very grey area. I had an imported US Dreamcast, and there were ways to ensure that you weren't paying £80 a US game title. But as a developer, as a small developer, I want to know that everyone is playing as many legitimate copies of my game, and if they aren't, there's a way that I can reach out to them to at least get them to understand why flipping to the light side is beneficial for them and us in the long run.
Yeah, I frankly agree. It's a difficult situation because even with music games in general, even outside of VR, licensing is one of the most difficult things. I mean, the reason it's not even a music game, but there's a reason like classic Tony Hawk Pro Skater games can't get re-released and stuff like that because these music licenses run out. They usually are given 3-4 years for that specific time of sale, and that is why you'll see digital games taken off the store. You can't buy them anymore because these licenses run out. On the back onto the exclusivity side of things, where we're at now, where Oculus isn't really buying exclusives anymore. They've turned away from the timed exclusivity thing, and the only things you're seeing from them are actually Oculus Studio produced things. So they are actually hiring developers to make games. For instance, if any of you have seen, a new Medal of Honor game is on its way exclusively for the Oculus platform by Respawn, who did recently Apex Legends and the Titanfall games. That's a game that they were originally making anyway. They hadn't decided a platform, what it was going to be. Oculus approached them and said, hey, basically, we will fund this game if you make it a VR game for our platform. What are your opinions on if someone is a Vive owner, an Index owner, or any other PC headset that is not Oculus based, they want to access their software, and let's say Revive doesn't support it very well, for whatever reason that may be, do you think those players have a right to be able to buy and play that game? Because, this is a situation where Oculus has funded and is publishing a game for their platform. They are more than welcome to do that. It's almost necessary for hardware to sell. But players still get upset about it if they can't play it on their other brand headsets. Do you think that they do have some entitlement to that, or is I don't know.
I think they do. In VR, especially right now, there's this massive craving for the full polished AAA titles. Medal of Honor is arguably one of the first ones that's going to be released. Recently, there was Asgard's Wrath.
Yep.
So my personal experience of this is, I really wanted to play Asgard's Wrath. I got so hyped by the trailers, fell in love with the game before I knew anything about it, just from the clips I'd seen. I knew I wanted to play this game. But I owned the original Rift CD1, but I also owned the Valve Index. Valve Index, really high resolution, great screens on it, really wide field of view, you crank it down. So I wanted to experience this game with that kind of headset. I sparked up Asgard's Wrath on the CD. So that's probably me. On the CD1, and it looked terrible.
Oh yeah?
And so I got angry inside because I thought, I've got to either try and get this working with Revive, so I can play it on the Valve Index, or I've got to go out and buy the Rift S headset, which I'm sure you all know my feelings on that right now. So I got really angry at the fact that maybe to play this AAA game that I've been craving, I was going to go out and have to spend like £400 on the Rift S, because the Revive worked, but it wasn't flawless. You could tell that it had been optimized for Oculus's own hardware. But I think, when VR is so new, it hasn't hit mainstream yet. We've still got a number of years to go for that, I think. I think Oculus need to allow this to be played on all platforms. It needs to be open. They're going to make the money out of that software sales anyway. They're going to make that. But if their hardware isn't up to scratch, I resent buying hardware that I don't feel fully represents what the game's capable of.
So I don't think there's an entitlement as such. You always do hear about entitled gamers and such, but as a consumer, I am upset that I can't play it on the platform that I prefer. So, at home I do have a bunch of VR headsets. I've got the Index, I've got the old Rift, the CV1, I've got the Index Pimax, Windows 1, etc., etc. And generally I would prefer to play pretty much everything on the Index because it is the best one. Unless I want to play it portably, then I'll go for the Quest. I do think that in the end, Oculus do have the right to keep it exclusive to their own platform if they are, it's coming from them originally. They're not just sort of buying something up halfway through development or when it's already been advertised, because it is sort of their products. But I do think it's kind of bad for VR as a whole because it's still, in a way, it's in its infancy. It's there's been several stages where people tried to get VR to take off, and this seems to be the first time where it's actually sort of getting into the mainstream media. And actually having a lot of this sort of very high-end content that everyone wants to play with major IPs like Star Wars and such, and we have things from Respawn and whatever else. It could do VR a lot of good if it was widely available to everyone. So I personally prefer if, say it is Oculus's thing, so you keep it to them, locked to their platform, say 6 months or so, but then let it go to other platforms as well. And just give people a chance, let it grow a bit more. They'll make the money back through software, and they'll also have sort of their own sort of benefits because they'll drive hardware sales for people who do want it, that much to buy the hardware for it. There's a lot of things like that where I think Oculus are taking this exclusivity thing to really push their own hardware, and I could see if they really overdo it, they could really push out HTC, especially with the Cosmos' recent launch, which has had a very lukewarm reception, in a way. And yeah, you can see next to him, he's played it as well, where the Oculus Quest has a very good reception. And especially with Oculus having a created store as well, I could see a future where people are mostly buying Oculus headsets, people are mostly going to the Oculus store rather than Steam. Indie devs could be launching their own VR games on Steam, but not getting many sales because people are going straight to Oculus Store for VR stuff instead of to Steam. And I think recently you mentioned your own game couldn't get on the Oculus Quest, was it? So at least not on the first try. So you recently tried to launch one of your games on the Oculus Quest, was that I heard, but you weren't successful?
Yeah, but then we were given reasons that it hadn't validated itself on the Rift. And they are looking for, new concepts, new titles, as opposed to just ports of 2-year-old titles. So I kind of understand that. The sales that we've done doesn't necessarily warrant a unique marketing spend which they apply to every single title. But there is also the argument that the store is very, perhaps overly curated and quite, short on numbers of titles, and perhaps there's an argument that Facebook could incorporate their wonderful algorithms that serve up ads in your timeline to better improve the discoverability and recommendation mechanisms within the store, allowing more titles, more categories, and more relevant material based upon each user's specific tastes, which would reduce that over-cluttered sort of sensation. I've been recommended Superhot because I own Superhot, but also I do fully appreciate, as a new platform, as a new piece of hardware, they want to control and determine the release schedule to ensure that each title gets its fair amount of limelight coverage, which as a games developer we know is really hard to get in the press. To give it its maximum sort of impact and opportunity at launch.
I think what gives Facebook the right to decide what is a great VR game experience, especially when you're coming from what I feel, they're coming from the data mining aspect. They want to take ownership of that platform. I don't think they're the right people to decide what ends up on that Oculus Quest store. Like, so many good experiences being turned down with the Oculus Quest store that I've spent hours on other platforms, on like Steam VR. Games like, I use Pavlov. I know you're a fan of Pavlov. Amazing game, really super polished. Everyone plays it, everyone loves it. Got turned down on the Oculus Quest store. And for people coming into VR now, and let's face it, the Quest really is doing VR a favour. It's getting people into the headsets. I think it is a great bit of hardware, but locking down the software that's available on it, these people aren't going to get those experiences. They're never going to experience what Pavlov was like.
Well, yeah, I mean, Pavlov is a bit of a sensitive one because it's a gun game and people get a bit freaked out about guns. Obviously, Quest is trying to appeal to a mass audience, and I can kind of understand why Pavlov is not a comfortable game to play on many levels. I can understand that. I can understand why that would be a sensitive one for Facebook.
It's just an age limit's needed, something like that.
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, video games have had guns in and violence in since the dawn of time.
I don't think it's the violence aspect that's actually putting them off. I think it's simply the comfort of Pavlov. I mean, just coming back to the Medal of Honor point, which was the question you asked about, do people have a right to say, Medal of Honor, I love that game, I want to be able to play it on my platform. Sure. You raised about the fact that you have like better hardware in your home than Oculus can provide you. And that is sort of galling, really, because in the PC market, we've never had a situation where, even with the graphics card battles, we never had a situation where people were making stuff really exclusively. That was a very rare situation. You might have had a graphics card would better support a game, but would never stop it playing. Medal of Honor is a genius move, right? Genius move because it's a nostalgic game. People like me, our age group, sort of 40-something, late 30s.
20.
Yeah, late 20s. Yeah, you got some motorway miles on you, mate. But we basically look back at that game with a huge amount of nostalgia, and we want it, right? And if we haven't got the right platform that supports it, we do feel that this is part of our sort of gaming history, and we have an entitlement to it. So I understand it's a sort of emotional aspect. In reality, do people have a right to someone's game? No. It's a difficult situation. I mean, this is why we're talking about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it from a different angle, in a different medium, if you look at TV and streaming packages, so, I believe there's a game 22 people kick a ball around, or 20 of them and one on each end, but, there's a whole range of championships involved in this, and if you've got BT Sport package, then you can watch some matches. If you've got Sky, you can watch some other matches. Do the people who paid for Sky, who haven't got BT Sport, do they have a right to watch those other matches?
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing where if we now pivot towards the Epic Games side of the conversation, where we've not so much had that in gaming before, but now, just like in how where you're looking at streaming services or even just classic TV, you're seeing certain shows on certain channels on certain platforms. Yeah, that never really been a thing here, where you talk about how, some games may have better support on one graphics card. There's never been a situation where it's like, this is an AMD graphics card exclusive. If you're running an NVIDIA card, you can't play it. Except for some occasions where it's been buggy on certain cards, but that's not intentional. So now where we're looking at games where if you want to buy it on your hardware, you can. You just have to buy it through this platform. This starts becoming a difficult conversation because when you talk about do players have a right to be able to play that game the way they want, we've now taken hardware out of the equation. They have the hardware that can natively play that game the way they want to play it, but they can't incorporate the friends list they want that are all on Steam. They can't have it among the rest of their other games on Steam. They can't use the Steam review platform. Buying through Epic Games is just a different experience. I'm not going to get into the conversation of feature set and not having a cards and stuff like that. But if you look at a game like Borderlands 3, and I use this specifically as an example because it is a big game from a company that very much had the money to not take this deal if they didn't want to. Players being upset about that game being on the Epic Games Store. to an extent, it's hard to ask how valid is that argument, because I think we get into a risky topic there. But what are your opinions on that software exclusivity in general? Do you, in terms of your personal opinion, will you just go and buy that game on the Epic Games Store? Or would you wait a year and buy it on Steam on the platform you want to play it on?
Me personally, if we're talking something like Borderlands 3, I'd just buy it on the Epic Games Store. It wouldn't necessarily bother me unless it was incredibly overpriced and you suspect that further down the line the price will be better on a different platform. But from a VR perspective, the only game that's drawn me over to Epic is Tetris Effect. That's the only one so far. And I forget to play it. I forget that I own it, because when I start my machine at home, Steam's there.
Steam, yeah.
And part of me goes, I'm sure there's another game I've got somewhere. And it's like, oh yeah, Epic Games Store, I've got Tetris Effect. And I just keep on forgetting to play it, just literally because I'm not used to going over to a different store. So for me at the moment, it's not a massive deal. I think when it comes to flat gaming, it's probably more relevant right now rather than VR, my perspective of VR.
So in my case, I haven't given in yet as such, but I think for the right game, I would just go and buy it if I'm really excited about a game. Like I think Rebellion are doing a game or two on the Epic Games Store. I can't remember if it's Sniper Elite That's Zombie Army 4 or Evil Genius 2. I might actually give it and get one of those if they're on the Epic Games Store. But say with the case of Shenmue 3, I originally backed that on Kickstarter, and I expected it was going to be on Steam. On the Kickstarter page, it did actually mention Steam at one point. On the survey, it mentioned Steam. But this was all before Epic Games Store was a thing. So when they did actually offer refunds, almost as like a bit of a protest vote, I did actually put in for a refund, and I'll probably either wait for it to be on Steam, or I might get it for PlayStation or something later on when it's on sale. It's lowered my excitement quite a bit, even though it is a very nostalgic game for me, because I love Shenmue 1 and Shenmue 2. They were two of my favourite games growing up. So it's a bit one of those things where if it's like from the start, it's known that it's going to be Epic Games, I don't really like it, but I'll put it with it. But if they're doing sort of a less ethical, at least in my opinion, tactics like that, like buying up something halfway after the expectations have already been set, not so much.
So, sorry, I missed, did you opt for the refund?
Sorry, yes, I did opt for the refund, yes.
You did? Okay.
Just not actually refunded it, so I should really chase them off for that, actually.
Sure.
So there's a really weird kind of tribalism with Steam and Epic and Origin and those platforms. It's people have an affiliation and a feeling that they should only buy their games in one place. And it's one of the only kind of situations where people are very comfortable having all of their digital content as eggs in one basket. They're confident, for instance, Steam being probably the most popular, least controversial platform to buy games on. That tends to be people are comfortable having tens of thousands even of pounds of games in a single provider's online content library, which to me seems a bit weird. I mean, wouldn't it be better to kind of spread your library out a little bit? These companies do, and they have folded and they will fold in the future as big as they are, right? Everyone remembers Friends Reunited and MySpace, right? The biggest things on the planet, and then boom, gone.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say that further down the line Origin might fold or even Steam might have its day. Frankly, no, I don't have a problem with buying across these different software providers. I totally get your point. The main problem I have is I forget I own games. I think, I have to then open every single client and try and remember what I got. That's the only issue.
And how many of those games across all those platforms have you not actually played or ever launched up anyway? But once upon a time, people were up in arms over having to install Steam to play half. Come on a few years, and I mean, is it really that much of an inconvenience to install and create another account? It's not costing anything for anyone. They're not limited by any hardware or anything. They have to go and make the additional purchases. Yes, there are maybe missing friends lists or invites. There's various nuances between the platforms. But everyone's on Discord anyway.
Sure. So what do you think then, we'll just touch on it very, very briefly. What do you think then about the conversation of feature set? So for instance, one of the big things Epic is missing that you would expect on any storefront is a review system. And they also don't have a refund system, which isn't necessary for digital content right now, but it is something people have gotten used to on Steam. The idea that you can buy a game, and as long as you've played less than 2 hours and owned it for less than 2 weeks, you can get a refund on that. No such thing currently exists for the Epic Games Store, though it is on their roadmap. They've put out a roadmap with features they plan on adding. And so out of curiosity, if we're looking at feature set, there, besides having no reviews, there's no cart system. Obviously, you have to then make a whole new friends list if you want to play online games. Do you think there's a valid argument there as to choosing to wait for your game for the right platform because you want to be able to get a refund if you don't like it, not have to add all your friends again on this new platform?
So as a content creator who most of our YouTube videos are actually reviews, that's actually great for me because it's not on the Epic Games Store, so okay, come to YouTube. But as a consumer, I do like to have the reviews there. You can see at a glance. You know that there's a fair open review system, that no one's been messing with it like they often do on like shops and such. That's not under the developers or the publisher's control about like what reviews might get deleted as such. I do appreciate having like my friends list all in one place, but I know that's not always possible. I do like, for example, say with Ubisoft, where you can actually get Steam keys for Ubisoft games. You register them onto Steam, and then it also registers on your Ubi account as well. So some of the features get integrated there. It's a bit of a crossover. So I would like it if more games did that, if more platforms did that, because a lot of the time I don't actually play. I used to love Battlefield, the Battlefield series, which is only on Origin. I bought it on Origin every time it came out, but then I stopped playing it after a while because I don't see it. It's not there. All my friends are somewhere else. I'm not so fussed about some of the features, but I know one of the big complaints about the Epic Store is that it does lack a lot of features, and I do agree that it does need to get better, and it should have really not launched until I had a lot more of them sorted out.
You think maybe then there could potentially be value one day in a third-party service that you don't buy games from, but perhaps could compile your games from across Uplay, Origin, Steam, Epic Games Store, GOG, that then maybe if you could compile a friends list there, have all your games there, just this one central app you could open that could connect them all, maybe it's a service someone may want to look into?
I mean, it would be a good idea. I mean, Steam itself actually does let you add non-Steam games to some success. So I suppose they're actually trying to take that and to encourage you to actually get on Steam itself. I've seen other third-party apps like just to compile central friend lists as such, but I've never seen one actually take off, to be honest. So I think it would need to be done by a very big, very popular company who's already established to actually succeed.
And it is worth noting, because I know we're getting towards the end, but it hasn't actually been mentioned yet that the reason the Epic Games Store exists in the first place and the reason that these exclusives are being bought is that Valve has been charging the standard sort of 30% for any sales made through its software, which Epic Games, as a game developer and publisher, was not content with. And so if you publish your game through the Epic Games Store, they take 12% and you get to keep 88 instead of 70. In early response to that, Valve sort of adjusted their numbers a bit, but the idea is the more you make on Steam, the less you pay Valve, but that only really benefits big AAA games. So if we're looking at small developers, the ones who really are more likely to entertain an offer from Epic Games. For instance, if we look at the Uplay developer, when they accepted their Epic Games deal, they put up an announcement post that kind of poked fun at the whole situation and some of the arguments against the Epic Games Store, which upset a lot of people. But if you look at it from their perspective, Epic Games covered the entire cost of their game. Every penny they'd spent making it, Epic Games paid them to put it only on their store. So as soon as they made one sale, they had made profit. To an extent, you've got to think, surely that's a deal that's hard to turn down if you're a studio trying to stay afloat, right?
Yeah, but how long did it take them to develop that application, to develop the infrastructure? And there's this sort of perception, I think, that somehow compute power in data centers and the transfer of data is somehow free. It's not. I mean, it's hugely expensive. They have to rent these massive areas. data centers all over the world to provide this data to people's computers, push out updates. The fact that Steam are charging 30%, they're using that to cover their infrastructure and obviously make a profit on top of that. You know, really Epic, you could look at it like that. I think that's a very optimistic way of looking at it, a non-cynical way of looking at it,
Sure.
which is that, you know, they're doing it in order to sort of launch their own, you know, to make a bit more money through the software they're making. It's a business. What they're trying to really do is use titles to build an audience, to build a platform which
Of course,
one day
yeah.
displaces Steam. I think, you know, that the reality is these things have a lot more cost other than just the software itself, a huge cost.
And on top of that, so they have kind of said, and I don't know necessarily how much they would stick to this with their word. They have said that if Valve were to change their numbers and match their sort of 12-88% split, that they would stop buying these exclusives and whatnot. But to an extent, you've got to think Steam has had what has almost felt like a monopoly on the PC digital game market for the last sort of decade or so, since, or more than that, since they introduced Half-Life 2. Which was the first, you know, that was exclusively on Steam, and they had kind of done a similar thing. You've got to think, without these kind of exclusivity deals, there's no way the Epic Games Store really would have gone off the ground in the same way. If you look at Borderlands 3, you know, there was a big campaign among a lot of players, mostly Redditors, to boycott the game and everything. And then a week after launch, we find out on the Epic Games Store, or in total, they sold 5 million copies in 5 days. It's their highest selling game, including on PC. It sold double what Borderlands 2 did, even though it was exclusive to the Epic Games Store. So you've got to wonder, to an extent as well, how much the loudest community online are really affecting the bottom line of buying those games. Do you think you potentially see a future where Steam is on a slightly more level ground with these other stores, with GOG, Epic Games Store, and potentially any newcomers? Do you think Epic Games have opened a door here?
Yeah, I mean, I believe competition is healthy. Steam needed to get competitors, and I think Epic gave it a massive wake-up call. So I think the more platforms there are like this, the more the prices will come down and it get more competitive over time. So from the consumer, the gamer, I think it's a positive thing in that respect. And we've just got to get over the fact that we have multiple launchers installed everywhere on our machines.
I agree. I think, you know, competition between these platforms is what's going to drive. It is a really positive thing. And I think anything that actually helps the smaller developers get off the ground and gives them a better deal, that's good for the whole industry, right? You've got guys developing stuff in their garage. They go on to be great game creators. They might go on to lead teams in larger production houses. You know, this is how you seed an entire industry. If you're kind of screwing the little guy right at the beginning, then essentially you're not doing any favors to the whole industry.
I was just going to say, from a developer point of view, the fewer platforms, the better, because it's less effort on our behalf to integrate all of the platform SDKs and everything. But going back to that earlier idea about maybe some overarching sort of standards, some API or something that can pull all that data in, if we can target that, and then that is feeding out your friends list and your invites and your stats and achievements and everything else, it makes it a whole lot easier. Otherwise, you know, as a small VR dev, for example, to maximise our marketplace, we have to target Oculus, Steam, Viveport. They all have various different SDKs and platforms. Thankfully, our multiplayer is in the cloud, so we don't care where it comes from. So we can do PC to PSVR to Quest to whatever. But ultimately, as a small developer, you've got to determine where do you pick your battles in terms of where you spend your money. And if a platform is offering to help you with some money, you're probably going to go there first.
All right, well, we've reached time. Unfortunately, there were a lot of data points I wanted to get to and a lot more things I was hoping to bring up. We didn't have time, unfortunately, but if any of you would like to bring up or talk to any of us about any of this, maybe bring your own opinions and discussions. I'm at least going to be here for the next sort of 10 minutes or so if you want to ask anything. I really thank you all for coming today, and really thank you guys on the panel for coming and speaking for us. I really encourage, if this is a debate you're interested in, I really encourage searching yourself, looking into all the facts to support your opinions. I think it's a really interesting debate that's happening right now. We moved into the digital landscape in all forms of media, including gaming, much faster than I think we anticipated. And so a lot of these things are becoming debates now, decades after moving into the digital marketplace. So yeah, thank you for everyone for coming today. I hope you enjoyed what you listened to. If any of these guys want to know where to find you, where to interact with you, how can they do that?
There.
Yeah, UK Rift on Twitter is the best place, or catch me on YouTube, please.
Okay, so we're Helix, we are a group of VR content creators. We're on YouTube and partnered on Twitch. And especially tonight, if anyone in the crowd is watching, check us out on Twitch for our Battle of the DJs.
You can find me on Twitch. It is me. Twitch.tv/VRBug, the best place for VR content.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Go play some games. They're all awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, bye.